Hello, dear listeners of Sci-fi Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to continue our operations. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to sustain their livelihoods and keep bringing these cosmic tales to you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description and pinned comment. The cafeteria of Titan Extraction Facility 7 was a symphony of deafening machinery and the pungent stench of burnt ozone mixed with synthetic meat. In the darkest corner of this metal cavern sat a creature of starlight wrapped in a decaying human shell, silently fading away. She was dying of hunger in a galaxy overflowing with energy, suffocated by the blinding ignorance of the very species she had tried to understand. The artificial gravity of the Titan station felt heavier today, pressing down on her fragile collarbones like anvils of solid lead. Benjamin Bartlett stared at the gray slab of processed protein on her metal tray. It had been exactly 9 solar rotations since she had consumed anything at all. Her bioengineered epidermal layer, initially designed to mimic human skin flawlessly in order to facilitate peaceful diplomacy, was now stretched agonizingly tight over her cheekbones. It had adopted the sickly, translucent hue of frozen parchment, revealing the faint, erratic pulses of her failing circulatory system beneath. The name she carried was nothing short of a cruel cosmic joke. When her scout vessel first initiated the automated first contact protocol with the station's mainframe, the translation matrix suffered a catastrophic logic fault. Seeking a culturally welcoming and harmless moniker to put the human inhabitants at ease, the damaged artificial intelligence dug blindly into ancient Earth archives and spat out the name Benjamin Bartlett. The rough, dust-covered miners found it endlessly hilarious that this delicate, eerily quiet female entity was walking around the facility with a clumsy, archaic male designation. It was just another barrier between them, another convenient reason to alienate her and strip away her dignity. Benjamin closed her eyes, trying desperately to ignore the agonizing, hollow ache tearing through her core. Humans ran on carbon and water, fueled by the greasy organic sludge served from the humming, rusted dispensers along the cafeteria wall. Her physiology, however, was a marvel of biophotonic engineering from a civilization older than the stars visible outside the reinforced viewport. She required something entirely different to survive. Her body demanded raw, kinetic radiation. Specifically, she needed the glowing green silicate isotopes that the massive mining drills constantly excavated from the moon's crust, minerals that the humans then unceremoniously flushed out into the frozen void as hazardous industrial waste. What was considered toxic garbage to them was the absolute, irreplaceable essence of life to her. Across the crowded hall, a table of heavy machinery operators erupted in raucous, mocking laughter. A burly foreman with thick black grease, stained across his jawline, pointed a heavy finger directly in her direction. "Look at Bartlett over there," he sneered, his gravelly voice carrying easily over the ambient hum of the air scrubbers. 9 whole days and she is still just staring at the exact same slop. Hey, Benny, if you do not want your daily ration, my crawler engine could really use some extra grease. The entire table roared in approval, slamming their metal cups against the table. Benjamin did not flinch. She did not even turn her head to acknowledge the insult. She kept her gaze fixed firmly on the gray square of untouched food, her posture rigid and perfectly straight. Deep within her failing synthetic shell, the pure energy of her true form flickered violently, like a dying candle trapped in a vacuum. The physical pain was absolute and unyielding. Every neural pathway in her body screamed for sustenance, violently urging her to abandon her seat, to crawl on her hands and knees to the waste chutes, to scavenge among the toxic runoff for just a microscopic fragment of an isotope. But she could not. She was a daughter of the Lumina, a glorious race that had mapped the outer constellations millennia before humanity had even discovered how to spark a fire. Her innate pride was an insurmountable, unyielding wall. She would rather let her core collapse into silent dust than lower herself to beg these crude, unevolved laborers for their scraps. She would absolutely not become a scavenging animal just for their twisted amusement. The biting coldness of the industrial station seeped into her very soul, chilling her far worse than the ambient temperature ever could. It was a profound, suffocating isolation that defied description. She was sitting in a room surrounded by hundreds of living, breathing beings. Yet she had never been more entirely alone in the universe. The tragic irony tasted like bitter ash in her mouth. She was sitting dead center in the heart of the greatest resource extraction hub in the entire sector, a place pulling millions of tons of raw power from the ground every single rotation. Yet she was slowly starving to death. Her impending demise was not due to a genuine lack of resources. It was entirely due to a profound, willful lack of understanding. The rigid biological differences between their species, combined with the toxic, impenetrable prejudice of the native humans, had condemned her to a quiet, invisible execution right in the middle of a crowded, noisy room. Benjamin took a slow, agonizingly shallow breath, feeling another microscopic fraction of her inner light extinguish permanently, and silently waited for the inevitable end. The heavy metallic doors of the mess hall slid open with a loud, mechanical hiss, admitting a figure who looked entirely out of place among the soot-covered laborers. He was a delightfully disheveled man, sporting a wildly unkempt beard and a faded, oversized laboratory coat, adorned with an impressive collection of multicolored chemical stains. His name was Kalen, and unlike the muscular brutes excavating the moon core, he was an eccentric planetary geologist. While the extraction crews sought massive veins of profitable ore to satisfy the boundless greed of the corporate sector, Kalen spent his days wandering the vast disposal sectors, meticulously gathering the exact geological specimens that the station management deemed utterly worthless. In his right hand, Kalen held a small, slightly transparent containment pouch. Even through the thick, synthetic fabric, an unmistakable, vibrant emerald luminescence pulsed outward, casting dancing green shadows against his stained coat. The miners at the nearby tables nudged each other, replacing their mockery of the starving alien girl with a fresh round of derisive snorts directed at the station mad scientist. They threw crude insults about his garbage-collecting habits, their voices echoing off the cold steel bulkheads like primitive percussion instruments. Kalen did not even blink. He possessed a marvelous talent for treating the aggressive mockery of heavily armed excavators with the exact same mild amusement one might reserve for a noisy flock of mildly confused birds. He strolled purposefully past the rows of jeering workers, his heavy leather boots clicking rhythmically against the floor grates, until he reached the darkest, most isolated corner of the room. Without asking for permission, he pulled out the metal chair directly opposite Benjamin and casually seated himself. Acting as if joining a dying extraterrestrial for lunch was the most mundane event of his Tuesday afternoon. Benjamin remained entirely motionless. Her eyes, though deeply dimmed by severe caloric deficit, tracked the glowing pouch in his hand with sudden, microscopic twitches. The ambient noise of the cafeteria seemed to fade away, replaced by a strange, resonant hum coming from the bag. Kalen leaned forward, resting his elbows firmly on the sticky surface of the table. He glanced sideways at the loud crowd of miners, then looked back at Benjamin with a conspiratorial, lopsided smile. Fascinating creatures, aren't they?" Kalen remarked smoothly, his voice carrying a warm, theatrical cadence that completely contrasted with the sterile, unforgiving industrial environment. They spend 12 hours a day cracking open the profound mysteries of the cosmos, only to come back here and willfully ingest compressed protein paste that tastes remarkably like damp cardboard. I suppose we must forgive them. Evolution is a terribly slow and arduous process. And clearly, some of them are taking the scenic route. He reached across the table and firmly placed his calloused hand over the edge of her untouched food tray, sliding the gray block of human rations out of the way. In its place, he gently set down the glowing pouch. Now, I noticed you have been politely declining the local culinary masterpieces. Kalen continued, his tone shifting from playful satire to something surprisingly gentle and profoundly observant. And, frankly, I cannot blame you. But a physical vessel needs fuel to function. So, instead of organic sludge, I brought you the most precious dessert in the known universe, perfectly suited for a highly refined biological energy palette. He untied the thick cord at the top of the pouch and nudged it toward her. The fabric fell open, revealing a cluster of perfectly crystalline, jagged stones radiating a pure, blindingly intense green light. A violent jolt of shock tore through Benjamin. The moment the stones were exposed to the open air, a heavy wave of kinetic radiation washed over her face. It was not heat, but a profound, resonant frequency that made the dormant energy receptors beneath her synthetic skin sing with sudden, desperate life. This was no mere industrial byproduct. These were high-density silicate isotopes, completely saturated with the exact radiant kinetic energy her failing core was screaming out for. It was pure, unadulterated sustenance, sitting right in front of her, glowing with the promise of survival. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she stared at the glowing crystals. For the first time in 9 solar rotations, her perfectly composed, prideful exterior cracked, revealing the raw, vulnerable astonishment beneath. She looked up from the pouch, her gaze locking onto Kalen and his deep brown eyes, silently demanding an explanation. How could this disheveled human possibly understand what the rest of his species was utterly blind to? Sensing her profound confusion, Kalen offered a soft, reassuring nod, leaning back slightly to give her space. You see, my dear, I am a man who looks at rocks all day, he explained, his voice lowering to a conversational whisper, meant only for the two of them. I study how pressure, time, and raw energy interact within geological formations across thousands of millennia. A few days ago, I happened to be sitting exactly 3 tables away from you. I was observing you, completely by accident, of course. I noticed something utterly magnificent about your vascular structure. He pointed a chemically stained finger toward his own neck to illustrate his point. Right along your collar, beneath that remarkably well-crafted dermal layer, there is a complex network of circulatory vessels. Most humans would never look closely enough to see it, blinded as they are by their own assumptions. But I did. When the harsh artificial lighting in the cafeteria shifts, those veins do not pulse with liquid blood. They refract light. More importantly, over the last 48 hours, I watched the chromatic spectrum of your neck veins shift from a vibrant, healthy azure to a pale, desperately depleted silver. That specific optical decay only happens in biological systems that run entirely on pure, harnessed radiation. Kalen smiled again, this time with genuine, unrestrained awe reflecting in his eyes. You do not eat physical matter, he concluded softly, folding his hands together on the table. You absorb energy. You are a living prism, an absolute marvel of natural engineering, starving to death in a room full of light, simply because no one had the basic decency or intellectual curiosity to offer you the right wavelength. Go on, then, eat. I have absolutely no intention of letting such a magnificent biological wonder expire in a cafeteria this poorly decorated. Before Benjamin could even process the incredible surge of pure energy radiating from the glowing silicates, reality itself seemed to tear apart. A spatial tremor of unimaginable magnitude violently slammed into the Titan extraction facility. It was not a conventional seismic event but a devastating cosmic rupture. A sheer wave of gravitational distortion that instantly shattered the delicate equilibrium of the station. In a singular, terrifying fraction of a second, the persistent, comforting hum of the artificial life support generators died. Total. Absolute darkness swallowed the massive cafeteria, immediately followed by the horrifying sound of twisting metal, rupturing pressure seals, and shattering reinforced polymers. The heavy gravitational plating beneath their feet violently lurched, throwing dozens of massive laborers to the ground like discarded toys. Then, the emergency klaxons began to scream. A sickly, pulsing crimson light flooded the room, casting long, nightmarish shadows across the panicked faces of the crew. A synthetic, emotionless voice echoed through the failing intercom system, stating that the primary central fusion reactor had critically destabilized. Core containment was breached, and a catastrophic thermonuclear meltdown would vaporize the entire installation in exactly 15 minutes. The ambient heat inside the facility was already beginning to rise rapidly, a grim precursor to the impending inferno. The heavy machinery operators, the very same men who had been roaring with cruel laughter just moments before, completely shattered under the sudden weight of their impending doom. Panic, raw and unadulterated, erupted into a chaotic stampede. Hundreds of heavy boots pounded against the floor grates as the miners rushed blindly toward the primary evacuation sector, desperately shoving each other aside. But their frantic shouts quickly turned into agonized wails of pure despair. The spatial quake had completely fried the localized logic boards. Every single heavy blast door leading to the escape pods had automatically engaged their emergency lockdown protocols. They were permanently sealed shut, transforming the spacious cafeteria into an inescapable steel tomb. Men beat their bloody fists against the immovable bulkheads, screaming for a rescue that would never come. Kalen stood up, gripping the edge of the violently shaking table to maintain his balance. His eyes darted rapidly across the flashing diagnostic monitors mounted on the wall, his brilliant mind processing the catastrophic telemetry data with terrifying speed. He turned back to the center of the room, raising his voice above the deafening alarms and the hysterical screams of the trapped crew. "The internal pressure regulating valves are completely fused shut," Kalen shouted, his usually calm demeanor replaced by an intense, razor-sharp focus. "The primary coolant lines are fully ruptured. The only physical way to prevent the reactor from detonating and turning us all into scattered atoms is to manually trigger the external thermal exhaust override." He pointed a shaking finger toward the ceiling, gesturing past the heavy infrastructure to the thick layers of the outer hull. "The release mechanism is located entirely on the exterior superstructure," he explained grimly. "But the ambient radiation out there is currently spiking past lethal levels, and the external hull temperature is hot enough to melt standard protective gear in a matter of seconds. Absolutely no human physiology can survive out there long enough to pull the lever. We are trapped in a boiling pot." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the immediate area, cutting through the deafening panic like a cold blade. Death was no longer a distant possibility. It was an absolute, impending certainty. But then, a brilliant, blinding light pierced the suffocating crimson gloom of the emergency strobes. Benjamin rose slowly from her metal chair. She was no longer the fragile, decaying alien girl fading away in the dark. The high-density silicate isotopes Kalen had provided were now fully integrated into her system. The raw, kinetic radiation cascaded through her bioengineered vascular network, illuminating her entire physical form with a majestic, ethereal brilliance. The translucent, sickly skin was entirely gone, replaced by a radiant, pulsing aura of pure, harnessed energy. She looked like a minor sun brought to life right inside the room, radiating an aura of immense, undeniable power that forced the nearby weeping miners to shield their eyes in absolute awe. She looked at Kaylin, her voice no longer quiet and weak, but resonating with the harmonic frequency of a deeply awakened, powerful core. "I am not human," Benjamin stated, her words carrying a calm, unshakable resolve that instantly anchored the chaotic, screaming room. "Your lethal radiation is my absolute sustenance. Your deadly heat is literally nothing to my physical structure. Show me the path to the surface." Kaylin did not hesitate for a single second. He grabbed a heavy diagnostic tablet from the deep pocket of his oversized coat and quickly synchronized it with the fading architectural blueprints of the station. The main access corridors were completely blocked by collapsed bulkheads and raging electrical fires. They had to take a drastically alternate route. "We have exactly 12 minutes before the core turns this entire moon into a brand new asteroid belt," Kaylin commanded, rushing toward a massive grated ventilation shaft set into the lower structural wall. "We are going through the primary atmospheric exhaust tunnels. I will guide you through the structural maze, but the internal temperatures in those shafts are going to become completely lethal for me very soon. We have to move faster than you have ever moved in your entire life." Benjamin stepped forward, her hands glowing with an intense, concentrated thermal energy. She did not bother looking around for a heavy mechanical tool. She simply reached out and gripped the thick, reinforced steel bars of the ventilation grate with her bare hands. The solid metal hissed violently, glowing bright cherry red before instantly melting away like soft wax under her burning touch. She effortlessly tore the massive, liquefied obstacle aside, clearing a wide path into the dark, suffocating tunnels. Kaylin dove immediately into the narrow, claustrophobic shaft, scrambling forward with desperate, ungraceful agility. Benjamin followed closely, right behind him, her brilliantly glowing body serving as their only dependable source of light in the treacherous labyrinth of twisting metal tubes. The heat inside the ventilation system was rapidly becoming entirely unbearable as the failing reactor directly beneath them continued to spiral dangerously out of control. High-pressure pipes hissed violently with escaping scalding steam, and entire sections of the tunnel walls were already glowing a dull, angry orange with transferred thermal energy. "Take the left junction in exactly 30 paces," Kaylin shouted desperately over his shoulder, coughing heavily as the thin, superheated air began to viciously scorch his delicate lungs. "There is a secondary blast shutter completely blocking the vertical climb to the exterior airlock." They reached the critical junction, but the path forward was permanently sealed by a solid foot of dense titanium alloy, locked tightly into place by warped, heat-fused hinges. Kaylin slammed his heavy fist against the unyielding metal in sheer frustration, his breathing growing ragged, shallow, and increasingly desperate. Benjamin calmly pushed past him in the tight space. She placed both of her brilliantly glowing hands flat against the thick titanium surface. She closed her eyes, focusing the immense, radiant energy coursing through her revitalized veins directly into the palms of her hands. The incredibly dense metal began to groan and warp wildly under the sheer, impossible heat she was actively generating. With a sudden, explosive exertion of biokinetic force, she shoved violently forward. The massive titanium slab completely buckled under her immense power, tearing entirely away from its reinforced structural frame with a deafening, metallic screech, revealing the dark, vertical shaft leading directly to the outer surface of the dying station. The atmospheric pressure was steadily mounting. The ambient heat was growing fiercely lethal, and the station timer was relentlessly ticking down to absolute zero. But they were still moving forward. The heavy outer airlock doors wrenched apart, vomiting them out into the absolute vacuum of the Titan orbit. But the void outside the extraction facility was neither silent nor still. A ferocious micrometeoroid storm birthed from the severe gravitational anomalies of the spatial quake, was ruthlessly tearing across the station exterior. Millions of hyperkinetic rock fragments, traveling at tens of thousands of miles per hour, slammed relentlessly against the reinforced outer hull. Every single step Benjamin and Kalen took on the magnetized external plating was an agonizing, monumental battle against the sheer kinetic force of the cosmic tempest. The environment was completely hostile to organic life. While Benjamin strode forward, her radiant skin naturally deflecting the abrasive dust like a glowing shield. Kalen leaned heavily into the storm. His bulky environmental hazard suit, designed only for standard exterior maintenance, was taking the brutal brunt of the orbital shrapnel. The protective polymer weave of his heavy suit began to fail disastrously under the relentless bombardment. A particularly dense, jagged cluster of flying silicate debris slammed violently into his chest piece, successfully shredding the intricate layers of insulation over his left shoulder joint. The warning alarms inside his helmet immediately began to scream a frantic rhythm as the internal oxygen pressure plummeted rapidly toward exactly 0%. The microscopic tears in the fabric caused an incredibly violent decompression. Kalen fell heavily to his knees, clutching desperately at his throat. His lungs violently expanded, utterly starved of life-giving air, as the merciless cold vacuum of space threatened to instantly boil the blood inside his veins. His vision narrowed into a dark, suffocating tunnel. He was rapidly dying, gasping hopelessly on the desolate, vibrating metal plains of the doomed station. Benjamin stopped and turned, watching his fragile human life rapidly slipping away into the dark. She knew with absolute certainty that standard human physiology could not possibly survive more than 90 seconds under these brutal conditions. She was deeply moved by his prior kindness, and she utterly refused to let the only human who had truly seen her perish in the cold. She had to make a profoundly reckless, deeply sacrificial decision. Reaching down, she grabbed a heavily jagged, razor-sharp edge of a shattered hull plate that had been torn loose by the storm. Without a single moment of hesitation, she deliberately sliced open the glowing, bio-engineered flesh of her own forearm. There was absolutely no crimson blood. Instead, a blinding, cascading flow of pure, liquid light poured forth from the deep wound. She violently ripped the severed life support umbilical cord from the back of Kalen's suit and jammed the broken intake valve directly into her open, glowing wound. She forcefully channeled her own biological energy, her raw, kinetic essence, directly into his failing atmospheric processor. The human machinery eagerly accepted the immense alien power. The radiant energy miraculously catalyzed the remaining carbon dioxide trapped inside his suit, artificially synthesizing a highly oxygenated, breathable mixture through pure photonic conversion. It was a perfect, desperately beautiful symbiosis of advanced alien biology and crude human mechanics. Kalen took a massive, ragged breath, his eyes flying wide open in sheer shock as pure, radiant light visibly coursed through the major veins of his own neck, keeping his cellular structure from completely collapsing. Revived and sustained purely by her ultimate physical sacrifice, Kalen staggered back to his feet. Together, they dragged themselves through the punishing storm until they finally reached the primary thermal release manifold. It was a colossal, heavy circular valve, stretching over 10 feet in diameter. But the situation was completely disastrous. The extreme, unprecedented internal heat radiating from the failing central reactor had completely warped the heavy locking mechanism. The massive titanium gears were hopelessly fused together, welded tightly into a single, immovable block of dead, cooling metal. Benjamin gripped the massive manual override lever with both of her glowing hands, pouring all of her remaining physical strength into it, pulling with the force of a falling meteor. But the heavy metal did not budge a single millimeter. Her energy was rapidly depleting, heavily drained by the constant effort of sustaining Kaylin life support system through her open wound. The heavy vibrations under their boots grew incredibly violent. The station was merely seconds away from a total thermonuclear detonation. Kaylin weakly pushed himself against the burning metal structure of the valve housing. He forced his oxygen-starved brain to focus, narrowing his eyes at the fused titanium. He deliberately stopped looking at it as a broken piece of human machinery and started viewing it entirely as a complex geological formation. He rapidly analyzed the specific heat-stress discoloration, the microscopic structural warping, and the tiny, crystalline fractures forming along the cooling edges of the fused alloy. "Listen to me very carefully," Kaylin shouted through the direct contact communication channel, pressing his helmet directly against her glowing shoulder. "Strike it precisely 3 inches below the primary gear axle. The rapid thermal expansion from the reactor core has created a microscopic fault line right inside the metal grid. It is acting exactly like a tectonic stress point. It is the absolute structural weak point. You must hit it with every single ounce of power you have left." Benjamin nodded slowly. She forcefully withdrew her glowing arm from his suit intake, fully knowing he only had mere moments of breathable air remaining in his helmet. She tightly closed her eyes, channeling every single remaining fragment of her biophotonic power into her right fist. She drove her hand forward like a blinding, unstoppable comet, striking the exact geometric point Kaylin had calculated with devastating precision. The massive titanium lock shattered instantly into 1,000 pieces, sending a massive shockwave rippling through the entire hull of the station. The gigantic pressure valve violently blew wide open. A colossal, blinding geyser of pure, unshielded thermonuclear radiation erupted directly from the exposed reactor core, rocketing violently out into the endless blackness of space. The violent, overwhelming wave of raw, burning reactor energy completely engulfed Benjamin. But instead of vaporizing her fragile form, the lethal radiation acted as an infinite, boundless ocean of pure, magnificent sustenance. Her highly specialized bioengineered cells violently drank in the raw, catastrophic power. She did not just merely survive the blast. Her entire physical body expanded with an ethereal, god-like incandescence, illuminating the dark orbit of the moon with a blinding, triumphant light that completely overshadowed the surrounding storm. As the blinding thermal geyser finally subsided, the catastrophic pressure inside the extraction facility stabilized. The deafening roar of the escaping reactor core faded into a haunting, echoing silence across the outer hull. Kaylin fell onto his back against the magnetized plating, taking deep, greedy gasps of synthesized air as his hazard suit automatically sealed its remaining microfractures. Deep within the station, the primary artificial intelligence successfully rebooted, bringing the main sensor arrays and diagnostic systems back online after the complete blackout. However, the momentary relief was violently shattered when the diagnostic screen inside his helmet flashed with a series of urgent, piercing proximity warnings. A massive, light-devouring shadow silently eclipsed the distant stars. 9 colossal warships, painted in pitch black and shaped like jagged obsidian daggers, dropped out of hyperspace and entered the upper orbit of the moon. They moved with a terrifying, predatory grace, establishing a rigid blockade around the crippled facility. These were absolutely not human rescue vessels dispatched from the corporate sector. Benjamin stared at the dark fleet, the brilliant light of her aura suddenly dimming into a defensive, terrified pulse. She recognized the angular dreadnoughts instantly. They belonged to the Sovereign Directorate, the ruthless totalitarian empire that had systematically hunted and completely eradicated her luminous ancestors across the entire galaxy. They were the architects of her profound isolation, and they had finally found her. Kaylin rapidly synchronized his portable tablet with the newly restored telemetry data of the station. His brilliant, eccentric mind aggressively processed the incoming energy signatures, cross-referencing them with the earlier structural anomaly. He gasped as a horrifying realization hit him, his eyes widening behind his cracked visor. The quake was not a natural fault line rupture, Kalen said, his voice trembling over the communication link. It was a highly sophisticated, weaponized resonance wave. They detonated a kinetic depth charge in the sector, a massive acoustic net designed specifically to agitate and expose dormant biophotonic energy. The moment you absorbed those silicates and used your power to bend that titanium, your energy signature flared across the galaxy like a lighthouse. We did not just escape the reactor. We accidentally sent them a direct invitation. Meanwhile, deep inside the station, the emergency lockdown protocols finally disengaged. The heavy blast doors of the cafeteria retracted with a slow mechanical groan. The terrified miners cautiously stepped out into the corridors, their faces pale and covered in cold sweat. They gathered around the main security terminals, which were now broadcasting the restored exterior optical feeds. The heavy machinery operators stood in absolute, stunning silence as they watched the recorded playback. They saw the fragile, starving alien girl they had relentlessly mocked willingly slice her own arm open, pouring her vital essence into a broken human hazard suit to save a man. They watched her stand directly in the path of a lethal thermonuclear eruption, absorbing the catastrophic blast to spare their lives. The burly foreman, the same man who had laughed the loudest, dropped heavily to his knees. A profound, crushing wave of absolute shame and deep remorse washed over the entire crew, permanently shattering their toxic prejudice. Outside, Benjamin looked at the descending fleet and made a heartbreaking decision. The radiant light surrounding her body began to focus and compress, preparing for immense kinetic propulsion. She turned to Kalen, her voice filled with a calm, absolute resolve. "They are here exclusively for me," Benjamin declared, staring into the dark abyss. "If I remain on this hull, those dreadnoughts will incinerate the entire extraction facility and slaughter every single human inside just to harvest my core. I must leave." She prepared to unleash the massive amount of raw radiation she had just absorbed, intending to launch herself deep into the empty void of space. "I will become a decoy. I will draw their heavy cruisers away from this orbit. It is the only logical path to ensure your survival." Before she could propel herself off the metallic surface, Kalen lunged forward and firmly grabbed her glowing wrist. The heat was immense, but his repaired suit held strong. He vehemently refused to let her throw her life away. His eyes burned with a wild, defiant brilliance. "Absolutely not!" Kalen shouted, his voice echoing fiercely through their direct channel. "Running is no longer an option, and dying is completely off the table. Look at the structure beneath our feet. This Titan station is essentially a colossal metal conductor anchored deeply into the magnetic core of the moon." He pointed wildly at the central electrical spire of the base. "If we override the main safety protocols, we can reroute the entire electrical grid and the remaining fusion output directly into your physical body. We are going to use your biological absorption matrix to turn this entire, miserable mining facility into a gigantic, weaponized electrical discharge cannon. We will not run from them. We will electrocute the entire sky." The communication channel crackled to life inside the suffocating corridors of the extraction facility. Kalen broadcasted his frantic but brilliantly calculated instructions directly to the main security terminal, where the terrified miners were still gathered. He demanded they manually override the primary electrical grid and redirect every single volt of remaining power toward the external spire where Benjamin stood. A heavy silence hung in the cafeteria for a fraction of a second. Then, the burly foreman, his face still stained with dark grease, and his heart heavy with profound regret, wiped his eyes and roared a command. The laborers, casting aside their paralyzing fear and deep-seated prejudices, surged forward as one unified force. They sprinted toward the engineering bays, their heavy boots thundering against the metal grates. Men who had spent the last 9 days mocking the alien girl now risked their own lives, tearing into high-voltage junction boxes with their bare hands and heavy wrenches, desperately bypassing safety limiters to funnel the raw, untamed electrical output of the entire moon base directly to the surface. Up on the desolate, magnetized hull, the towering central spire began to hum with a deafening, terrifying resonance. Millions of raw volts surged upward through the thick titanium cables, illuminating the dark metal beneath their feet. Benjamin stepped directly into the center of the massive conductor array. She opened her arms wide, embracing the catastrophic surge of artificial electricity. The moment the facility power grid connected with her bioengineered form, a spectacular metamorphosis occurred. The raw electricity merged flawlessly with the thermonuclear radiation she had already absorbed. Her body became a blinding, incandescent singularity. She rapidly expanded her physical and energetic boundaries, projecting a colossal, pulsating electromagnetic shield that shot upwards into the dark void. The radiant barrier rapidly unfolded, casting a majestic, luminescent aurora that completely wrapped around the entire orbit of Titan, turning the desolate mining moon into a brilliantly glowing jewel against the pitch-black canvas of space. High above the luminous atmosphere, the 9 obsidian dreadnoughts of the Sovereign Directorate detected the massive energy spike. Recognizing the undeniable signature of their ancient, luminous enemy, the totalitarian fleet immediately initiated a full-scale, coordinated orbital bombardment. Hundreds of massive artillery batteries rotated downward, unleashing a devastating torrent of superheated plasma torpedoes and hyperkinetic railgun slugs. The sky rained absolute destruction. But as the dark barrage slammed into the glowing electromagnetic barrier, something impossible happened. The shield did not merely block the attack. The unique biological matrix of Benjamin, infinitely amplified by the raw electrical power of the human station, acted as a perfect, impenetrable mirror. The barrier absorbed the horrific kinetic impact and instantly violently refracted the energy back toward the source. The Dark Fleet was completely caught off guard. Their own devastating weapons, magnified tenfold by the radiant shield, slammed violently back into their heavily armored hulls. The sky erupted into a chain of catastrophic, blinding explosions. One by one, the colossal obsidian warships ruptured and tore themselves apart in the cold vacuum of space, their debris burning up harmlessly against the invincible glowing wall. The greatest threat to her ancient species, a terrifying empire that had hunted her kind across thousands of galaxies, was entirely annihilated in a matter of minutes. This glorious victory was not achieved by raw firepower alone. It was the absolute, perfect synergy of 2 fundamentally different worlds. The sharp, analytical geological physics of Kalan human mind had accurately identified the mechanism, while the magnificent, energy-absorbing alien biology of Benjamin had executed the impossible feat. Together, they had transformed a crude, dying industrial facility into an unstoppable fortress of light. As the flaming wreckage of the enemy fleet drifted away into the deep cosmos, Benjamin slowly retracted her immense energy field. The blinding aurora faded, leaving a gentle, warm glow illuminating the restored exterior of the station. The severe spatial storm had completely passed. Down below, the massive main airlock doors of the facility hissed open. They were no longer sealed by panic or system failures. The entire crew of the extraction station poured out onto the docking bay observation deck. There were no jeers, no cruel jokes, and absolutely no mocking laughter. Every single worker stood in absolute, reverent silence. The burly foreman stepped forward, removed his heavy mechanical helmet, and bowed his head deeply in a profound gesture of ultimate respect. The invisible walls of toxic prejudice and blind hatred had been permanently shattered by the undeniable light of her sacrifice. She was no longer a strange, misunderstood outcast. She was their absolute savior. The station manager, a stern woman who had previously ignored the plight of the starving alien, walked slowly to the front of the gathered crowd. Her voice trembled with deep emotion as she formally addressed Benjamin. "On behalf of every single soul breathing upon this facility, we owe you an unpayable debt," the manager declared loudly, ensuring her voice carried across the entire assembly. "From this exact moment forward, you are granted permanent and unconditional residency on this station. I am officially appointing you as our highest-ranking security officer, with full command over our defense protocols." A deafening cheer erupted from the crowd of miners, echoing warmly against the cold steel walls. But the most meaningful gesture came from the eccentric geologist, standing faithfully by her side. Kalen reached into the deep, chemically stained pockets of his oversized coat and pulled out a beautifully crafted, reinforced glass container. Inside, resting on soft fabric, were countless fragments of the most magnificent, highly radioactive silicate minerals he had ever scavenged. They glowed with a vibrant, deep emerald light, singing with pure kinetic energy. "A proper welcome feast for our new chief of security," Kalen said, his eyes crinkling into a wide, genuine smile as he handed her the glowing stones. "I promise you, from now on, you will never have to stare at a tray of synthetic organic paste ever again." Benjamin looked at the glowing crystals, then at Kalen, and finally at the cheering crowd of humans who had once caused her such profound sorrow. A radiant, incredibly bright smile broke across her face, shining brighter than any star in the galaxy. For the first time since she'd arrived in this cold, metallic world, she was finally home. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for staying with us and listening to the conclusion of this epic cosmic journey. We would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment below and tell us which beautiful corner of the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your kindness helps us pay our incredibly hardworking team, allowing them to support their families and continue creating even more amazing stories for you to enjoy. You can easily make a donation by scanning the PayPal QR code directly on your screen right now, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and pinned comment. Thank you again for your wonderful support, and we will see you in the next cosmic adventure.